You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on April 23rd. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available for purchase on Amazon in ebook and paperback formats. Audio is coming. And you can grab the first chapter for free over at fertilityfriday.com/vital sign. That's fertilityfriday.com/vital sign. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 254. Welcome to the 254th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I've got a great episode for you today. I've been thinking about what I wanted to talk about on today's podcast episode for quite some time, actually. I had several different ideas of what I wanted to talk about, a few different topics that have come up in the Fertility Friday Facebook group. But today I decided to specifically talk about the ways that fertility awareness can help you to get pregnant. And whether or not you're trying to get pregnant right now, I know some of you are currently trying to get pregnant, and that may have been what drew you to this podcast, this episode specifically, or to the podcast in general. But many of you are not trying to get pregnant right now, but it's definitely on your future horizon, something that you're wanting to do within the next couple of years. And so today's episode, wherever you are on that spectrum, whether you're trying to get pregnant right now or whether you have that kind of in your future plans, this episode will be interesting to you just to think about the ways that fertility awareness specifically can help you when you're trying to get pregnant. Now, if you're listening to this episode in real time, we are just closing up registration for Fertility Awareness Mastery, and that is my 10-week live group coaching program that is specifically aimed at helping you to gain confidence in using fertility awareness to achieve your intentions. Now, I know some of you who are listening are actively avoiding pregnancy and looking for an effective non-hormonal alternative to birth control. And for those of you who have been actively trying to conceive for a while and it hasn't been happening, I know that some of you are looking for answers and you're wanting to gain a deeper insight into your menstrual cycles to find out what you can learn from them. Is there some information in my menstrual cycle chart, whether I'm paying attention to my cervical mucus, my basal body temperature pattern, my cycle overall, that can give me some indication as to why it's not happening? Especially if you've been told, if you've had testing done and been told by your fertility doctors that everything's fine. If you're not conceiving month after month after month, then obviously everything's not fine. And so wherever you sit on that spectrum, there's a spot for you in Fertility Awareness Mastery. And so, as I mentioned, if you're listening in real time, we are starting next week. Our first session is on Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019. And so if you have been waiting for the last minute, it has officially arrived. So if you're wanting to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery, head on over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and make sure to complete your registration today. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. And I'm excited to have you in there. Now, without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. All right. Well, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, today I wanted to spend some time talking specifically about the ways that fertility awareness can help you when you're trying to get pregnant and even before you're actually trying. I've had some really insightful conversations, both with colleagues and clients recently, that has really reiterated for me the concept of preparing for pregnancy, preparing your body for pregnancy, and why that's important. And, as a culture, it just blows the mind how flippant we are about the topic of pregnancy. And essentially to this day, the most sound advice that we typically get from our healthcare practitioners is essentially just to start taking a prenatal, a few months before we're ready to start trying, and just to, basically wait until the minute that we're ready to start trying and go off the birth control pills. So essentially what we are typically doing is taking birth control right up until we're ready and, starting to take prenatal. And that is the extent of which we plan. And there's so much more that we can do to prepare our bodies for pregnancy. And there's so many ways that fertility awareness can specifically help us and inform us when we're ready to start trying. So let's get into the first one. This is something that I've talked about a little bit here and there, and it's something that I talk about in the fifth vital sign. The first thing that I want to say in terms of how fertility awareness can prepare you to get pregnant is by preserving your fertility. And so what that means specifically is that when you're in that stage where you're not actually ready to start trying for a baby, when you are actively preventing pregnancy, but you know that pregnancy is on the horizon. So whether that means that you are planning to start trying to get pregnant within, a 6-month time frame, a 1-year time frame, a 1.5-year, 2-year time frame. But for you, you know that pregnancy is on the horizon. I think most of us fall into this state of mind at some point in our lives where we know that we want to have a baby at some point in the future. And ultimately, this is the time when we can start planning, even though we're not ready yet. And there's so many different reasons for this. So when I say that fertility awareness preserves your fertility, when you're not trying, what I mean is that by using a non-hormonal method of birth control that has no impact on your physical body and your hormonal cycle, your endocrine system, when you're allowing your menstrual cycle to happen naturally, you're allowing your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland to speak to your ovaries. You're, allowing your endocrine system to do what it's supposed to be doing when you're not interfering with your hormonal pattern. Just by not interfering with it with hormonal birth control, you are preserving your fertility. And so one of the ways that you can preserve your fertility when you're, planning to get pregnant in the future is by coming off of birth control, well in advance. My recommendation is 18 months to 2 years minimum. And there's so many different reasons for that. One of the reasons is that hormonal birth control is associated with a temporary delay in the return of your normal fertility. Now, this is something that I've spoken about a lot because what the research tells us is that when you're on hormonal birth control and you come off of it, there is a period of subfertility that lasts anywhere from 6 to 18 months or more. And so there's a couple specific ways that this operates. One of the ways that hormonal birth control impacts your physical body is that it actually shrinks the ovaries and reduces the ovarian reserve parameters. Hormonal birth control has been shown to shrink ovaries by 50% or more. And in addition to that, a woman's ovarian reserve parameters, so things like her anti-Müllerian hormone levels, as well as her antral follicle count. So these are some key measures of fertility. These are some of the tests. If any of you have ever been for a fertility workup, these are the tests that your fertility specialist is doing to assess, how fertile you are and to basically tell you what your chances of getting pregnant are. It's ironic because these ovarian reserve parameters are more effective at predicting the success of a potential IVF outcome. But either way, hormonal birth control has been shown to suppress your ovarian reserve parameters and shrink your ovaries. And so what that means, when I talk about this, I've mentioned this publicly a number of times. It's in the book. I've had lots of conversations. It's shocking information, of course, because we're not told this. It's not when we're given a prescription for hormonal birth control, it's not like we're told that, it's been shown to shrink the ovaries. So this is not something that we've been taught or aware of, even though it's right there in the scientific literature. But what it means, it doesn't mean that this is a permanent side effect of the pill, and it doesn't mean that your body doesn't recover. So I just want to stress that the research doesn't indicate that these results and that these effects are permanent. It does indicate that these results are temporary, but it takes time for your body to bounce back. And so, there's a few studies that show that these ovarian reserve parameters, the pill does suppress them because the pill and other combined hormonal birth control primarily act and are primarily one of the reasons that they're so effective is because they actively prevent ovulation. The majority of hormonal birth control, that's the main mode of action by suppressing ovulation. So if you think about that, it makes sense. If you're suppressing ovulation, then it's going to have some sort of impact on your ovaries. And so when we talk about this temporary delay in the return of your normal fertility, it means that because we've suppressed the ovaries with this hormonal birth control, it's going to take some time before the ovaries bounce back, before the endocrine system reserves to normal function. And according to the research, it takes at least 6 to 7 months before your ovarian reserve parameters will come back to normal, restore normal ovarian function post birth control. So my recommendation of, coming off of birth control, a minimum of 18 months to 2 years before you're ready to start trying, it's really to allow your body to bounce back and to rebound. And it's based on what the evidence shows us. So some types of birth control have been shown to suppress fertility for longer than others. And for some women, they've been taking birth control specifically because of menstrual cycle irregularities that they had. And so you might be one of them. As you listen to this episode right now, you may have been put on birth control because you had irregular periods or irregular bleeding, or because you weren't sure when your next period was coming back. And in those cases, you're at an even higher risk of having a delay in how long it takes your menstrual cycle to return back. And when it does return back, there's no guarantees that it's going to be, perfectly normal, especially if it wasn't normal to begin with. The pill doesn't correct anything when it comes to menstrual cycle health. It just masks the problem. So if there was an existing problem, the chances are it's still going to be there because, you weren't treating it at that time. And so, going back to the point of, number one, which is that fertility awareness preserves your fertility. It's to say that by using a non-hormonal method of birth control, so when you're actively avoiding pregnancy, by relying on fertility awareness during those years before you're ready to try to conceive, you're allowing your body to cycle naturally. If you're coming off of birth control, you have an opportunity to just allow your body to naturally rebound. And so to have this, that there's a period of temporary subfertility, and that there's a period of time that it's going to take your body to recover from the use of these hormones. And so by, using fertility awareness or another non-hormonal method of birth control, you're allowing your body just to kind of go back to normal. But in addition to that, by tracking your cycles, so by paying attention to your cycle length and your mucus patterns and all of the different aspects of your menstrual cycle, you're also gaining information. So you're preserving your fertility, but you're also going to be you'll be privy if there is an issue. So if you were put on birth control because you did have some sort of issue, when you come off of birth control and you start tracking your cycles and you start using fertility awareness as a way to avoid pregnancy, you're also having the ability to monitor your cycles. And if there is something wrong, then by giving yourself that period of, 18 months to 2 years or more post birth control, you are really giving yourself that opportunity. If there is something wrong, then you have time to address it. It's much harder when you wait until the minute that you're ready to have a baby to come off birth control, because you just don't know. Some women get pregnant right away, but other women, it takes them quite some time. And so you want to give yourself a long enough runway so that your body can kind of sort itself out. You can kind of figure everything out before you have that added stress of actively trying to conceive. Okay. So that's the first way. The first way that fertility awareness helps you to get pregnant is by preserving your fertility, by allowing your body to cycle naturally and using this as a birth control method so that you're not interfering with your endocrine system or anything like that. And your fertility is just allowed to kind of do its thing and naturally flourish. So the second thing, and I think this is where most of us, if you're listening and you've been trying to get pregnant and you've discovered fertility awareness, this is where most of us are at in terms of what fertility awareness can do for us. But it's helping us to time sex accurately. Now, this is something that I've talked about a lot, and there's always questions about how to time sex. And, it's interesting because fertility awareness stands at odds to a lot of the common myths and misconceptions about the menstrual cycle. And so, what we're often taught and told by our healthcare practitioners, and, there's all these companies that are creating all these different products for us to kind of help us with this. But essentially, what we're told is that we have to figure out which day is ovulation day and have sex on that day. Or we're told we just have to have sex every other day, throughout the whole cycle. What we're not taught is how to identify when the short window of fertility is in the menstrual cycle. So with fertility awareness, beyond being an actual kind of method and practice, it's an educational tool. So for women who discover fertility awareness, this is often, in most cases, the very first time that you've had any type of credible, reliable, and accurate information about your body and how it works. And so when you learn fertility awareness, you discover that there's only about, 6 days of the menstrual cycle where pregnancy is possible. And the reason for that is because there's a short window of time in your menstrual cycle as you approach ovulation when you produce cervical mucus. And that mucus keeps sperm alive for up to 5 days. So that means you can have sex on one day and ovulate several days later and get pregnant because of the sex that you had before. And that's because the sperm are literally alive and in your body, hanging out, waiting for ovulation for up to 5 days. And the reason that, scientifically speaking, there's about a 6-day window of fertility is because we have that 5 days that sperm can be kept alive by your cervical mucus, and ovulation happens on only 1 day. So 5 plus 1 is 6. So therefore we have 6 days of your cycle when you can possibly get pregnant. And it's not hard to identify what days those are, because ultimately, if you start to use fertility awareness, there's 3 main signs that we're paying attention to. So we have cervical mucus, we have basal body temperature, and we have cervical position. And so, most of us have noticed cervical mucus, even if you didn't know what it was. If you're not on birth control and you are ovulating and cycling naturally, you've probably noticed that there's some times in your cycle when, you go to the bathroom and you notice like it's super wet down there, it's super lubricative, like you're wiping and it's like you got to wipe a bunch of times because it seems like there's something there, or you notice that it's really slippery and the toilet paper kind of slips when you're wiping. And many of you may have even found yourself in the doctor's office thinking that you had an infection because you had this discharge, quote unquote, that you didn't know what it was. And so, once you start charting, you start to realize that this happens as you approach ovulation. It's cyclical. It happens prior to ovulation. And then when you ovulate, the mucus dries up and goes away. And so this is something that you can pay attention to. As opposed to what we're taught about the menstrual cycle, one of the most prevalent myths about the menstrual cycle is that the menstrual cycle is always 28 days. Ovulation always happens on day 14. However, in reality, the menstrual cycle can range, and ovulation doesn't always happen on the same day every cycle. And so there are women out there who are literally trying to get pregnant and having sex, on day 14 every cycle and not getting pregnant, potentially because they ovulate earlier or later than that in their menstrual cycle. The most reliable way to time sex accurately is by paying attention to your mucus. So instead of trying to figure out like what day you usually ovulate on or what day you think you're going to ovulate on, literally paying attention to your cervical mucus, like what is happening? Do you have mucus today? And if you see cervical mucus, to actually have sex that day. Now I realize I didn't define what cervical mucus looks like. So I know many of you have been listening for a while, but if this happens to be the first episode that you're tuning into, cervical mucus can look like clear, raw egg whites, kind of like it'll stretch between your fingers. And it can also look like creamy white hand lotion. And so, if you notice that, that's when you want to have sex, when you're trying to get pregnant, regardless of whether or not you think you should be ovulating that early or late or anything like that. And that's one of the ways that fertility awareness helps you to get pregnant, because it shatters all the myths about the menstrual cycle and it helps to educate you on what really happens in your cycle so that you understand that cervical mucus is inextricably linked to your fertility. And essentially, it's like, if you see the mucus, that's when you have the sex, like plain and simple. So that brings me to number 3, which is understanding the role of cervical mucus. And so I've already alluded to, one of the most crucial roles of cervical mucus in that it keeps sperm alive for up to 5 days. So what's important to know about your cervical mucus is that you only produce it, in your pre-ovulatory phase. So at the beginning of your cycle, after your period, before you've ovulated, that's when you start producing cervical mucus as your estrogen levels rise. And cervical mucus keeps the sperm alive for up to 5 days. But what's important to know is that outside of your fertile window, outside of this small period of time, your vagina is super acidic and it doesn't support sperm life at all. So basically, as I put it in the 5th vital sign, your vagina is essentially a death trap for sperm the vast majority of the time. And so, after you've ovulated and your mucus dries up, sperm can't survive inside of your vagina. And, not to mention the fact that, you've already ovulated, so there's no egg that can be fertilized or anything like that. And your cervix is closed. So even if the sperm wanted to, get in, there's nowhere for them to go. But there's only a small window of time where the sperm can actually survive inside of your vagina. So I think that's really important information to have. Because for many women who've been trying to get pregnant for a long time, they may have been having sex just for weeks on end. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having sex all the time, but it's a different dynamic when you're trying to get pregnant. It takes a little bit of the fun and spontaneity out of it, especially when it feels like it's a chore. It's something that you have to do. And especially if you're doing it, every other day for like 20 days of the menstrual cycle or something like that. It's really different doing it for that reason, as opposed to just doing it because you want to and then not doing it if you don't want to. So one of the benefits of fertility awareness, especially for women who are trying to conceive, is that you really start to realize like the fertile window is fairly small. And so if you're having sex kind of like on demand, and, I've worked with enough women who've been actively trying to conceive for a long time to know, sex takes on a different meaning. And so you can really minimize the phase of your cycle where you're having sex for a reason, and then utilize, the outside of that phase. So utilize the post-ovulatory phase, utilize the other parts of your cycle when you can't get pregnant, to just have sex for fun and connect with your partner for love, to kind of remember why you're making a baby in the first place. So in terms of understanding the role of cervical mucus, so first things first, it keeps the sperm alive. Second thing, it's the right pH for sperm. Without it, sperm can't survive inside of your vagina. But in addition to that, there's a few other really specific and awesome things that cervical mucus does for fertility that we should be aware of. So this comes as a surprise to a lot of women that I'm working with, but the majority of sperm that men produce are abnormal. In the healthiest man alive, at least half, if not more, of even the healthiest man alive, half of the sperm is completely abnormal and incapable of fertilizing anything, just to put it out there. So when it comes to sperm parameters, even the optimal sperm parameters listed in the scientific literature of, what would be optimal for conception, even that. So optimal for conception is listed as somewhere between, say, 12 to 15% morphology, meaning literally 12 to 15% of all the sperm are normal. 63% motility, meaning that, 63% of the sperm have normal motility, meaning how well they swim. And, in terms of sperm concentration, optimally 40 to 50 million sperm per milliliter. That sounds like a lot, but I just want to break it down for you just for a minute. In the 1940s, your average man had an average sperm concentration of about 113-ish million sperm, according to what the research has to say. So what we consider to be optimal today is less than half of what, in terms of the numbers of what men had, how many years ago is that? 60 years ago or something like that. In addition to that, like I mentioned already, 12 to 15% normal. So out of every 100 sperm, optimal is having 15, out of 100 that are normal. And so just to think about that for a minute, the majority of sperm that men produce, even your healthiest man, can't even fertilize an egg. So one of the critical roles of our cervical mucus is to filter out the bad sperm. So Mother Nature knew this. She knew that the majority of sperm, that men produce aren't capable of fertilizing an egg. So right there in your cervical mucus, you have a screening tool. So cervical mucus screens out poor sperm on two different fronts. So sperm that can't swim properly can't actually swim effectively through the mucus. So there's a physical barrier in your mucus that actually prevents sperm that don't have good motility from being able to swim through it. So it basically catches the sperm that can't swim properly. And then the second aspect of that are the sperm that are malformed. So when I talk about, optimal being like 12 to 15% morphology, what that means is that 85% of the sperm have like two heads, no head, two tails, no tail, misshapen head, whether it's too small or too big. So it doesn't look anything like we think of when we think of what a normal sperm looks like. And so those sperm that have all of those morphological issues, our mucus actively selects them and filters them out so that only the best sperm can actually make it through. And so think about that for a minute. Cervical mucus is crucial to normal fertility. So when you're trying to make a baby, the old-fashioned way, birds and the bees at home, your cervical mucus is crucial. It's critical and it's essential. And so, the next time you're trying to, especially for those of you who are actively trying to conceive right now, I want you to just remember that, all the ovulation predictor kits and all the timing and all the apps and everything aside, what you need to look for is your actual mucus. Do you have mucus today or not? And if you do, have the sex, because mucus is essential for fertility. Okay, so let's move on to number 4. So another one of the ways fertility awareness will help you to get pregnant is by helping you identify any underlying issues that could be interfering with your chances of conception. I alluded to this already, but basically when you're charting your cycles, if you think about your menstrual cycle as a vital sign, so, what is a vital sign? The most common vital signs are your blood pressure, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, how many times your heart beats every minute, as well as your body temperature. And in addition to that, if your, doctor's measuring your vitals and something's off, so let's say blood pressure, if the blood pressure is too high or too low, not only does that give the doctor information in real time, about your health, but it also provides the doctor with a specific place to look. So if the blood pressure is too high, the doctor knows it could be caused by a certain number of things, and that gives the doctor a place to start in terms of where to start looking. And in the very same way, that's what your menstrual cycle does. So there's a normal healthy range of what we would consider to be normal for the menstrual cycle. And it's not just the length of your cycle. So we have this idea that, the menstrual cycle is 28 days and that's the only, way, the only option, the only alternative. And if it's anything but 28 days, it means it's a problem, but that's not true. There's a range of what we would consider normal. And a normal cycle can fall anywhere between about 24 and 35 days in length. And so that's only one of the factors that we're looking at. We would also want to look at your period. How long is it? How short is it? Does it trail on? Are you having spotting before or after your period? How heavy is it? How much are you bleeding? And all of those types of things. What color is it? What does it look like? Do you have pain with your period? All those types of things. Do you ever have bleeding at other times of your cycle? So that's, one aspect of it. When are you ovulating in the menstrual cycle? Do you have cervical mucus prior to ovulation? How many days of mucus do you have after ovulation? How long does it take for your period to come? How long is your luteal phase, the second half of your cycle? Is it too short? Is it too long? Do you have serious PMS, symptoms that can indicate a hormonal imbalance? So looking at your menstrual cycle as a vital sign, what that means is that by charting your cycles and tracking and paying attention to what you're seeing, so not just the length, but what happens between period to period, like what's all that other stuff that's happening? Is ovulation happening normally? Looking at these things, there's a lot of information that you can gather about your health and your fertility and, your menstrual cycles. And specifically when you're trying to conceive it, it's not happening, information that could give you additional clues that may have been overlooked if you weren't looking at your menstrual cycle. That's one of the ways that charting your cycles can really help you, especially when you're trying to conceive. I've worked with a lot of women who've been in these shoes. Some women who have come to me, at some point in their journey, whether they've just been trying for a while and they're not really wanting to go into the medicalized model just yet. They don't want to do IVF just yet. They don't want to run into IUIs and, spend all the money and do all of those things, maybe because they're a bit averse to the hormones or they just want to wait, that's more of a last resort. Other women come to me after they've gone through the gauntlet, after they've done several rounds of IVF or several rounds of IUI. And what the consistent feedback that I receive when I'm working with women who are trying to get pregnant is that fertility awareness allows them finally to understand what's going on. So all this time, it's been a mystery. They have no idea what's happening in their bodies. They're not connected to their cycles. They don't know when they're ovulating, if it's happening normally. And, especially for women who've been through the medical side and have taken the hormones and, the ovulation triggering drugs and all of those types of things, this is a way for them to reconnect with their bodies and to take back control and also to have the ability to do something about it. So one of the great things about charting your cycles is that you start to realize quite quickly that your cycles are very receptive to what's happening, in your life. So whether it's acute events like stressful situations or things like that, or whether it's an actual health issue, your menstrual cycle is always reflecting that back to you. I was having a conversation with somebody in my Facebook group recently, and, the question came up of, is it possible that IBS symptoms could show up in the menstrual cycle? And, this is something I've seen a lot. I've had a number of clients that struggle with IBS symptoms, and it does show up in the menstrual cycle, often through a pattern of irregular cervical mucus observations or even a pattern of irregular bleeding, delayed ovulation, different things. Your body responds. And so by charting your cycles, again, consistently what my clients will say after having gone through that process, learning how to chart and learning how to interpret the menstrual cycle, learning how to identify what's normal and what's not normal, and how to kind of pay attention to what your body's doing, it's really empowering. It puts you back in the driver's seat. It gives you more information and more knowledge. And it gives you more confidence. So when you're having conversations with your healthcare practitioners, you're able to advocate for yourself better. And you're also able to recognize that the things that you do in your life, whether those are your, lifestyle habits, or whether it's your diet, or even just how, what type of practitioner that you're seeing, and in the different ways that you can approach different health conditions, all of those things help. And I think what's consistent for women going through the healthcare system is that we want to be heard, we want to be acknowledged, and we want to understand what's happening. We want somebody to take the time to take us through and to just demystify it. Because for most of us, the menstrual cycle has been a mystery throughout our lives. We have no idea what's going on. We don't know about our fertility. This whole concept of pregnancy and how it happens and why it might not be happening it's like a foreign language. And so fertility awareness is what invites you into this conversation and allows you not only to be a member, but an active participant in your own fertility and your own care. So that is one of the ways that fertility awareness helps you get pregnant, because it invites you into the conversation, gives you the information you need. How does my cycle work? How does this whole fertility and pregnancy thing work? But in addition to that, it gives you a whole other layer of insight into your menstrual cycles, especially when you can do it with somebody who's trained to read it. So just like, I'm not a doctor, so I didn't go to med school. I don't know how to read an electrocardiogram. So an electrocardiogram is a test that records your heart's electrical activity. So if you're having heart trouble, you go to your doctor and they, give you that test, and the doctor can actually read that test and tell you information about your health. So in the same way, someone like myself who's been trained in fertility awareness and interpreting the fifth vital sign, I'm able to look at your charts and help you to make those connections and provide that additional piece of information that could really be the key to understanding why pregnancy isn't happening. All right, so maybe I saved the best for last, but the last point that I wanted to talk to you about today in terms of how fertility awareness can help you to get pregnant is by helping you to stay on track with your health goals. One of the things, I always say this, but when you learn fertility awareness, I love the iceberg analogy. Like you see this tiny little, what looks like a tiny little, piece of ice sticking out of the water, but 90% of this iceberg is under the water. So like the whole Titanic example, and the captain of the ship is all like, let's drive through. And then obviously we all know what happened there. The majority of the iceberg is below the water, so you can't see it. So when women discover fertility awareness, we come to it typically for a reason. It's like, what can it do for us? I want to get pregnant. I want to know how to, I want to know how to identify my fertile window. I want to know which days to have sex on. When you're trying to avoid pregnancy, it's like, I want a non-hormonal method of birth control. So it's very simple. Like, this is my problem. This is the solution. This is what I want out of this method. But what happens is when you start charting your cycles, you realize that it's more than that. Every time I run one of my group programs, every time I take on a new client in my 4-month coaching program, what happens is that we really get the method down. That's obviously the central aspect of it. But in addition to that, there's this connection that's made. Every cycle that we go through together, we are able to see just how much the cycle, your menstrual cycle, is affected by, your day-to-day life. Just how intertwined your menstrual cycle is with your health. And so, whether you're struggling with something like IBS and, or you have food sensitivities and you're consuming different foods, you're trying to figure out what you're sensitive to. And every time you consume a certain food, you see a reaction in your cycle. There was just a woman in my Facebook group today who commented that what did she say? I think she did consume food that she was sensitive to and she had a reaction and she noticed her temperature spiked up. And she was, wondering, like, could this be related? And the answer is yes. Your menstrual cycle is so highly receptive to what's happening in your body, in your life. If you have a health condition, an endocrine disorder, if you have some sort of hormonal imbalance, these are things that you will see consistently in your menstrual cycle. And just like any of the other vital signs, it responds in real time. And so as you chart, as you go on your charting journey and you're charting your cycles, what often happens is when we're tracking one thing, we become motivated. When you're tracking your cycle, it often represents a turning point. So perhaps this is one of the ways that you are moving towards taking control of your health. I think this happens for a lot of women. They come off the birth control, they start charting their cycles with fertility awareness, and this represents an opportunity to get healthy. And for a lot of women, that's why they're doing it. Maybe they are struggling with some other health issue, or they have a concern about that. And so this is one of the ways that they're taking control of their health. And so as you track your cycles, let's say you're making some positive changes, you're reducing your sugar consumption, or you're, getting rid of some of the chemicals in the products that you've been using. Maybe you're switching to all natural products and getting rid of some of those products with all the xenoestrogens and the different estrogenic chemicals and all those types of things. Well, what starts to happen is as you're charting, you see the feedback. So it doesn't take long before you realize what affects your cycle, either positively or negatively. And so maybe that's something to do with diet. So for a lot of women, they start to realize like, whoa, when I eat all the crap, my cycles don't respond very well, or my periods are harder or worse. Or on the flip side, when you remove a lot of those chemicals and products, you might start to see an improvement in your cycles. When you start eating cleaner and exercising and taking your vitamins, you might notice an improvement in your cycles, an improvement in your hormones and your moods and overall hormone balance and your PMS symptoms and etc. And so what happens is charting helps you to stay on track. So, it's not the same for everybody, but over the years, I've seen it in both myself and my clients, where it's always like a little reminder. So if you didn't really realize how alcohol could affect you, or how your, 3 coffee a day habit could be affecting you, when you start charting, you start to see it. It's reflected back to you. And so for a lot of us, it helps us stay on track. All of us, we're human beings, so you're going to do things sometimes, you're going to eat the thing or drink the alcohol or whatever. We're all living our lives. But when you track your cycles and you start to see, like, when I do this is the result, you start to kind of maybe just grow up a little bit, maybe just start to take a bit more ownership of it, maybe just start to take a bit more responsibility for it. And just to have that much deeper understanding that what I do to my body matters. And there is an effect that I can see in my charts. And so it kind of maybe just keeps us a little bit more on our P's and Q's, like keeps us a little bit more on our best behavior and kind of keeps us on track. Because if you go off track, you can see the result in your cycle. And so I feel like it kind of has that potential to keep you from really going off the rails. And so that's why I would say that that's another reason that another way that fertility awareness can help you to get pregnant. Because by tracking your cycles and by seeing the impact that you can have on your own health and your own fertility and your own body, it can kind of keep you on track in a way that perhaps you wouldn't be if you didn't have that visual. So a great example of this is stress. And this is something that it surprises me, frankly, how frequently this is something that comes up. We live in a really interesting world. We're living in a really interesting time. As women, we're striving to have amazing careers, amazing lives. And often this comes with a lot of hard work and dedication, like nose to the grindstone, And, for many women, it's when we start charting our cycles and when we start to see the signs of chronic and acute stress in the menstrual cycle, that we finally have that moment to be like, oh, maybe this isn't working. Maybe I can't work 80 hours a week every single week in an entire year. I can see how it's affecting my body. And so in that way, fertility awareness and tracking your cycles can really be kind of like a barometer, or just something that keeps you on track. And so that brings me to the end of my list. So I just want to recap. So, in today's episode, I wanted to talk to you about some of the specific ways that I have seen fertility awareness help women get pregnant and improve fertility in general. And so just to kind of backtrack, just to go back over, the first was that it preserves your fertility. Fertility awareness gives you a way to prevent pregnancy naturally without having to rely on endocrine disrupting hormones. And so when you're ready to get pregnant, there's no temporary delay in the return of your fertility. You just switch from not having unprotected sex on your fertile days to having sex on your fertile days. If you've taken the pill, or if you're on the pill, or if you're thinking about coming off the pill anywhere from 18 months to 2 years before you're ready to start trying is ideal. It's like buying insurance because it gives you this window of time It allows for your body to just bounce back and go through that temporary period of subfertility. It allows you to identify any possible issues that could be, happening in your cycle. And it would give you enough time to really start addressing those before the pressure is on for you to start trying to get pregnant. But furthermore, it doesn't alter anything. Fertility awareness, it just allows your body to do what it's doing. And basically you're modifying your behavior around it. And so in that way, it preserves your fertility. The second thing, the second point is that fertility awareness teaches you how to time sex accurately. So when you're ready to start trying to get pregnant, it helps you to know what's happening in your cycle and when you should be timing sex. Fertility awareness is counterintuitive in the sense that our culture, our society, our medical healthcare practitioners tell us to have sex on day 14 of the cycle because we still adhere to all of those myths based on a complete lack of understanding of how the menstrual cycle works. And so instead of being told to have sex every other day, like forever, you can really narrow it down and pinpoint that specific 6-day period of time, prior to ovulation when you're actually fertile and improve your chances of conceiving. And there are women out there who literally, just by changing when they have sex, they get pregnant, just by changing it based on the fertility awareness techniques. So the third is understanding the role of cervical mucus. So I spent some good quality time talking about cervical mucus and the important role it plays in fertility. And so when you discover and learn fertility awareness, it really helps you to appreciate how crucial cervical mucus is to the process of getting pregnant naturally. Without having this knowledge of fertility awareness, really, I don't know where else we would learn about mucus. Even in medical school, doctors don't necessarily learn in depth the role of cervical mucus as it pertains to the menstrual cycle, as I learned as a fertility awareness instructor, in my training. And so, having that understanding of the crucial role it plays helps you, further, even more to time sex accurately, because then it's no longer a mystery how pregnancy happens. We have a really specific idea of how it happens. And we also know, how important cervical mucus is in optimizing our chances and in screening out the bad sperm, as we spoke about earlier. And so number 4 is that fertility awareness helps you to identify underlying health issues that could be interfering with your chances of conception. Just like any other vital sign, when you're paying attention to your menstrual cycle and all of the different signs throughout your menstrual cycle, from day 1 of your period until the last day before your next one, there's a lot of information that we can glean from paying attention to your menstrual cycle. And these are things that can be overlooked or not noticed or not caught if you're not charting. And I've seen that happen many, many times. I've worked with so many women where through charting, we've identified underlying issues just because we're seeing different patterns in the menstrual cycle. We're looking for answers like, why are we seeing that? Why aren't we seeing mucus? Why is your luteal phase so short? What's going on? Why are your temperatures so low? So just by seeing the different things that we can see on your menstrual cycle chart, it can lead us to identify underlying health issues that otherwise could potentially go unaddressed. And these are things, clues, important information that you need when you're trying to get pregnant. And the last one is that fertility awareness helps you to stay on track of your health goals and just kind of keeps on track because it essentially operates like a feedback system. And so when you're on track, you'll see that your cycles are healthy and falling within the normal range. But when your cycles kind of fall off or when we start to see different abnormal patterns, those are signs. Having that power, basically, it puts the power back into your hands. Instead of feeling like there's nothing you can do, you start to realize that you have the power like directly in your hands to improve the health of your menstrual cycles because your cycles are always reflecting back to you the state of your overall health. It's really encouraging to see that as you make improvements in your overall health and your lifestyle patterns and all those different types of things, that you can actually watch your cycle improve. It doesn't mean that it happens overnight. It doesn't mean that, you start incorporating kale or something and then all of a sudden your cycles are perfect. But it does mean that your cycles are always reflecting back to you your state of overall health. So as you make positive changes, I've seen it time and time again in my own cycles and, over the years with many, many clients. When you start making those positive changes, you will see the tangible improvements in your cycle as long as you're on the right track. And if you don't see those improvements, it means you haven't hit it. You haven't identified the thing that is causing the problem. And so with that said, I want to thank you for spending some time with me today. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. It was It just, honestly, it came to me this morning. I thought, you know what, this is what I want to talk about today. And really, I was inspired by a session that I had with a client earlier this week. It just made me think, we need to talk a little bit about the specific ways that fertility awareness can help you when you're trying to conceive, because these are the tools as women that we need. These are the tools that empower us to be able to advocate for ourselves, to be able to ask for the care that we need, and also to be able to have a deeper understanding of what's happening in our bodies. After all, when you get pregnant, the baby grows inside of your body. So we have the right to understand how our body works, how our fertility works, and we have a lot more power and control over our health than we think. And so I want to thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, you'll find the show notes page over at fertilityfriday.com/254. If you're listening to this episode in real time, whether you are actively trying to conceive or you have pregnancy on the horizon at some point in the future, I want to invite you to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. Now, this is my live 10-week coaching program where we go through fertility awareness in great detail. The two main parts of the program, the first part is to help you to understand fertility awareness through and through so that you can have a deep understanding and confidence about charting your cycle accurately. And so whether you're trying to conceive or trying to avoid, to know exactly what's happening on any day of your menstrual cycle, to know whether you're fertile or not and exactly what's going on, and, how to interpret all of the different signs of fertility. But in addition to that, this course empowers you with the knowledge of how to understand and interpret your menstrual cycle as the vital sign that it is, and how to make those connections between your menstrual cycle and your overall health. At the end of this program, it really helps to empower you. It gives you a different and newfound appreciation of your cycles and a way to really understand how you can positively impact your health and your cycles by all of the different choices that you make in your life. So if you're wanting to join us, as I mentioned at the top of this episode, it is the last minute. If you're listening to this episode in real time, we start on April 23rd. So that would be, a couple of days from now. So head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and complete your registration today. If you're listening to this in the future, hello, you'll see on that page if there's still spaces available, if we're still open, then you'll see that. And if not, you'll see this, the information for the waiting list. So if you're wanting to join us, next time around, if you're listening in real time, I'm not sure when the next round will be, but it'll either be, September of this year, October, so of 2019, or possibly January of 2020. Oh my gosh, 2020. That's crazy. Anyways, I'll deal with that later. The realization that next year is 2020. But if you're wanting to join us, head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. I would love to have you in there. And so I just want to thank you for, tuning into the episode. I know there's a lot of new listeners to the show. I want to welcome you. You can join us in the Fertility Friday Facebook community. We always have great conversations going in there. And as you can tell, I'm often inspired. Ideas for episodes come to me based on the conversations that we have in there. So head over to fertilityfriday.com/community to join us in the Fertility Friday Facebook group. And for those of you who are in that stage of either actively planning to get pregnant or actively trying right now, or planning to get pregnant within the near future, I do want to invite you to grab a copy of The Fifth Vital Sign. So that is my first book that I released back in January. It's in paperback and ebook format as I release this. And I'm excited I suppose I'm teasing you a little bit because audiobook is not officially out yet, but it is finished and submitted. So stay tuned. I will let you know once it's out. So it will be coming in audio format soon. I know some of you have been emailing me like, where's the audiobook? And I'll talk a little bit about it. I think I'm going to drop a special episode to talk about why it took me so long to get it out. But either way, audiobook is coming. But for those of you who are in that stage of trying to get pregnant and planning for the future, chapter 17 of The Fifth Vital Sign, it's a whole chapter dedicated to planning for pregnancy. So I go into a lot of the details that we talked about in today's episode, but I also talk about, egg health, sperm health. In today's episode, I alluded to sperm quality being a big issue, and I go into incredible detail into the book because it's something that I'm seeing to be a huge, huge problem that a lot of practitioners kind of skirt over. So there's a certain percentage of women for whom honestly, we all as women, we take it on. We believe that if we're not getting pregnant, it's because of us. It's because there's something wrong with us. But, there's a certain percentage of couples for whom the issue is not her. The issue is her partner's sperm. And that is what is delaying or preventing pregnancy. So there's lots of details in there. The fifth vital sign, you can head over to thefifthvitalsignbook.com for details. The book is available on Amazon. So thank you again. I hope you have a great weekend or week, depending on when you're listening to this episode. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.